How do we reconcile following God's will with what Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane? Thank you so much for asking that question. Let's take a look at it. So Matthew chapter 26, verse 39. He went on a little farther and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then verse 42. Then Jesus left them a second time and prayed, "My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done." And finally, verse 44. So he went to pray a third time, saying the same things again. So we see three things here with Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane. 1, Jesus was vulnerable in his prayers. 2, he told God what he wanted. And 3, he still submitted to God's will. Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever the Holy Spirit brings us across your timeline. My name is Michael. Welcome to Ongoing Gospel Seekers. We've been studying an article in my Bible titled Effective Prayer. And our definition for effective prayer has been continual communication with God in our lives. We reached a section where we are talking about requirements of effective prayer. And the third requirement was to be in harmony with God's will. And as we had been studying it, my Fire Bible brought up the idea of Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane and how praying for our desires isn't necessarily wrong, even when it's against God's will. So let's get into the meat of that. So in our verses, we see how human Jesus is. Because again, what is prayer? Just talking to God and building a relationship where we are open, honest, and vulnerable on our own accord. Because he already knows everything. And just because he does doesn't mean he doesn't want to talk to us. And Jesus' vulnerability shows in this prayer because he's honest with God about not wanting to suffer. How I read these verses is, I do not want to suffer, God, but my want to do your will is greater than my desire not to suffer. He's vulnerable, asking God if there's another way while he's sitting there struggling with the idea that he's been ordained to suffer for God's will. And so in his struggle, even though he knows he's ordained for this, he still tells God what he wants. And that's the beauty of this. Jesus is not sinning because he tells God, I do not want to do it this way. Because Jesus knew no sin. So let me be the first to tell you if you haven't heard it yet. Telling God what you want is not a sin. Unless, of course, you're telling God you want something that fully goes against his word. Let's not get it twisted. But again, this is why Jesus is and will always be our perfect example. Because he didn't allow his wants to become his idol. He said what he wanted, but his ultimate goal was to please and follow God. There's nothing wrong with telling God, if there is another way, please let there be another way. But Father, at the end of the day, to you be the glory. Let me put it this way. God can use you even if you don't agree. Look at Jonah, which then also means you can obey even when you don't like what you have to do. Sometimes it isn't enough just to look at the future glory that God is going to get. And again, be vulnerable about that. Do you know how many times in the situation I'm going through, I've asked God, where are you getting the glory in this? And that being said, you know who else also did that? The psalmist. If I haven't said it yet, I want to make sure I make it very clear. I want each and every single one of us to have a relationship with God and talk to him the same way we would talk to literally anybody else in our lives. Because again, that is all he had ever wanted. But that's all I have for you today. The Lord wants to, we will see each other again. And then we will continue to seek the good news of the Holy Spirit together. I love y'all. Shalom.